I still remember the exact sound she made when he grabbed her. Not a scream, not even a cry. Just this small, startled gasp, the kind you make when something happens so fast your body doesn't have time to react properly. That sound has stayed with me ever since. It plays in my head sometimes, usually late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I've let go cold. My daughter's name is Hazel. She's 28 years old. She works as a dental hygienist at a clinic in Oakville, Ontario, and she has this laugh, loud, a little embarrassing in restaurants, the kind where her whole face gets involved, and strangers turn to look, and then they can't help smiling too. She got that laugh from her mother. Her mother passed when Hazel was 14, breast cancer, and after that it was just the two of us for a long time. I raised her in a semi-detached house in Burlington, coached her rep soccer team for 3 years even though I knew nothing about soccer, drove her to and from school every single day until she got her G2. She was everything. She still is. She met her husband, ex-husband now, thank God, at a work conference in Hamilton about 4 years ago. His name was Trevor Ashford, 32 at the time, an account manager at a commercial insurance firm. Tall guy. Well-dressed in the way that guys who care too much about being well-dressed are. He had this handshake that went a half second too long, if you know what I mean. I noticed it the first time we met. I didn't say anything because you don't say that to your daughter. You smile and you ask about his work and you pour him a beer and you tell yourself you're being paranoid. His mother, Diane Ashford, 58, retired school administrator from Mississauga, was the kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged it by presence alone. Not warmth, presence. She had opinions about everything. The way Hazel decorated her condo, the way she cooked, the fact that she kept her maiden name hyphenated at work. She never said anything directly. She was too careful for that. It was always a question shaped like a compliment. Oh, you painted the kitchen yellow. That's certainly a choice. That kind of thing I noticed. Hazel told me I was reading too much into it. For almost 2 years I kept my mouth shut. I had dinners with them. I watched hockey playoffs at their place. I gave Trevor the benefit of the doubt again and again because Hazel seemed happy, mostly, and she was an adult, and it wasn't my place. My sister told me I was being smart. My buddy Ray, who I've known since grade 9, told me I was being a pushover. Probably both were right. The dinner was in November. I remember it was cold out. That specific kind of cold you get in southern Ontario in early November, where it's not quite winter yet, but summer is so far behind you it might as well be a different life. We were at a restaurant called the Meridian in downtown Burlington. Nice place. White tablecloths, the kind of wine list that comes in a leather folder. It was a combined birthday dinner. Hazel's birthday was the week before, Diane's was the week after. Trevor had suggested it. I thought it was a kind gesture at the time. There were 4 of us. Me, Hazel, Trevor, and Diane. We'd been there maybe 40 minutes. We'd ordered our mains. The conversation was civil, a little stiff the way it always was when Diane was around, but nothing alarming. Trevor had had 2 glasses of wine. I wasn't counting specifically, I just noticed, the way you notice things when some part of your brain is always on low-level alert around a person, even when you can't explain why. Hazel made a comment about something. Honestly, I don't even remember what it was. Something small. Something that would have landed as a joke in any normal family. Trevor didn't find it funny. I saw his jaw tighten. I've thought about that moment many times since. The way a person's jaw tightens is a tiny thing, but it's also not a tiny thing at all. He reached across and grabbed a fistful of her hair near the back of her head and yanked it toward him, just once. Hard enough that her neck snapped back and she let out that sound, that small, airless gasp, and her wine glass tipped and caught itself on the edge of the tablecloth. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. Diane looked at her son, and she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a horrified smile that looks like a smile because she was in shock. A real one. Small, close-lipped, approving. She picked up her own wine glass and looked away. I have been in a few situations in my life where time seems to do something strange. A car accident on the QEW years ago. The moment the doctor told me about my wife. This was one of those moments. Everything slowed down and sharpened at the same time. I looked at Hazel. Her eyes were wet. She was staring at the table. She was not going to say anything. She had learned somewhere along the way not to say anything in these moments, and the realization of that. The understanding of what that meant, of how long this had likely been happening, hit me somewhere behind my sternum like a fist. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I have a bit of a background in that. Spent 6 years in the Canadian Army Reserve in my 20s. Worked in industrial project management for 15 years after that. You learn a certain kind of discipline. You learn that the first thing you want to do is almost never the right thing to do. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone, slowly. I set it on the table with the camera facing toward Trevor and Diane, and I pressed record. Trevor looked at my phone. He looked at me. He started to say something like, "What are you doing?" or "Put that away." I don't remember the exact words, and I looked at him, and I said very quietly, "I'd think very carefully right now." He went quiet. Diane said, with the kind of measured indignation that requires rehearsal, "I really don't think that's necessary." I said, "Hazel, sweetheart, do you want to go to the washroom for a minute?" She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once and pushed her chair back and left. I watched her go. I turned back to the table. Trevor was staring at the tablecloth. Diane was looking at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be calm and not quite succeeding. I said, "I'm going to pay for this dinner, and then Hazel is going to leave with me. And you two are going to think very hard about what just happened here tonight." Trevor said, "It was nothing. She knows it was nothing. You're completely overreacting." I said, "Keep talking." He stopped. I picked up my phone. The video was 2 minutes and 43 seconds long. It had caught Trevor's voice, Diane's response, everything that had come after. It hadn't caught the grab itself. I was honest with myself about that, but what it had caught was still significant. His reaction to being recorded. Diane's comment, the whole atmosphere of the thing. I called our server over, a young woman named according to her name tag, Bree, and I asked for the bill. I paid it. I left a $40 tip because none of this was Bree's fault. Then I went to find Hazel. She was in the small lounge area near the front entrance, standing by the coat rack, her jacket already on. She'd been crying, but she'd stopped. She had that look I remembered from when she was little and something had gone wrong. This careful, composed expression she'd put on, like she was deciding in real time how much of what she felt she was going to allow herself to show. I helped her on with her scarf. I said, "You're coming home with me tonight." She started to say something about her car, about needing to. I said, "We'll get your car tomorrow." We drove back to Burlington in mostly silence. I didn't push. I have learned in 51 years of living that some things need a little room before they can be said out loud. About 20 minutes in, somewhere on the Appleby line, she said, "That wasn't the first time." I know. I didn't say that. I just reached over and put my hand on hers on the console, and I kept driving. She stayed with me for 3 nights. The second evening after dinner, she started talking. I won't share all of it because it's hers, not mine. But I'll say this, it had been going on in various forms for most of their marriage. Not always physical. In fact, the physical was rare, which is one of the reasons it was easy to minimize, easy to tell herself it wasn't that bad. Mostly it was the other kind. Comments about her intelligence, her appearance, her competence, tracking where she went, making her feel small in front of his family, then telling her she was too sensitive. And Diane knew. She didn't just know, she enabled it, praised it sometimes in her quiet, close-lipped way. On the third day, I asked Hazel what she wanted to do. She was quiet for a long time. We were sitting at my kitchen table. Outside, the first actual snow of the year was coming down, those big flat flakes that drift instead of fall. She said, "I want out, I just don't know how." I said, "Okay." That's all I needed to hear. The first call I made was to a family law lawyer. Her name is Rosalind Beckett, and she practices in Oakville. I'd worked with her firm on an unrelated matter a few years prior, and I knew she was sharp and thorough and didn't waste words. I explained the situation. She said she needed to meet with Hazel directly, which was correct. Obviously, it was Hazel's case, and I said of course. Hazel met with her 2 days later. Rosalind explained the process. In Ontario, separation is the start of the clock. You don't need a divorce decree to be legally separated. You just need to be living apart with the intention of ending the marriage. They'd been married less than 3 years, so the property division situation was relatively contained. The condo in Oakville had been purchased jointly, and Hazel had contributed significantly to the down payment from an inheritance she'd received when her grandmother passed. That mattered. The harder part was the behavior itself. In terms of the physical incident at the restaurant, Rosalind was clear with both of us. What we had on video wasn't footage of the assault itself. I'd been honest about that, but it was still valuable. Trevor's reaction on camera, Diane's comment, the context. And more importantly, Hazel was willing to make a formal statement. I went to the Burlington detachment of the Halton Regional Police the next morning. I'm not a dramatic person by nature. I filled out a witness statement. I provided my phone for the video. I answered every question they asked me straightforwardly. The officer I dealt with, a constable in his 30s, was professional and took it seriously. The police spoke with Hazel Lee. She provided her statement. She was honest about the full history of the relationship, not just the restaurant incident. They took it all down. Trevor was contacted by police. I wasn't present for that and don't know exactly how it went, but I learned afterward that he had initially tried to characterize the restaurant incident as a playful gesture that had been misinterpreted. Apparently, the video and Hazel's statement together made that argument difficult to sustain. He was charged under Section 266 of the Criminal Code of Canada, assault. It's not a serious charge in the hierarchy of criminal offenses, and I won't pretend otherwise. The system's response to domestic violence in this country is improving, but it is not perfect. What happened in the months that followed was slow and often frustrating, and there were moments when I watched Hazel's face during the process and felt a helplessness I hadn't felt since sitting in a hospital waiting room with her when she was 14 years old. But here is what I can tell you did happen. Trevor's employer was a commercial insurance firm. When word got around, and in the tight world of financial services in the GTA, things do get around, it created complications for him professionally. I didn't make a single call to make that happen. I didn't need to. A criminal charge of assault, even pending, does not look good on a man who manages client accounts and represents a firm's reputation. He was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. The condo. Rosalind fought hard. Hazel's down payment contribution was well documented. We had the paper trail from her grandmother's estate. In the separation agreement, Hazel retained the condo. She did change the locks, and yes, the first thing I thought of when she did that was one of those small practical things you don't think of in the middle of everything. Rosalind had suggested it before Hazel even asked. Diane. I'll be honest, Diane was never going to face legal consequences for what she did in that restaurant, and I knew it. She didn't commit a crime by smiling, but there's a specific kind of justice that happens socially, quietly, without anyone engineering it. Diane had a wide circle in Mississauga. She sat on a fundraising committee for a hospital foundation. She was proud of her standing in that community. When the nature of what had happened in that family became known, and Hazel, to her enormous credit, stopped hiding it from people she'd been hiding it from for years, some of those social connections became complicated. I'm not going to overstate it. She didn't lose everything, but she lost the easy breezy respectability she'd counted on, and she knew exactly why. Trevor pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, common assault, about 8 months after the incident. He received a conditional discharge with probation conditions, which included mandatory participation in a domestic violence intervention program. Is that enough? No, I'll be direct. No, it's not enough. The system asks women to endure a tremendous amount to reach a result that often feels inadequate. I watched my daughter sit through months of legal process, and I am not going to put a bow on that and call it satisfying. What I will say is that his admission of guilt was real. It was on the record, and it meant that Hazel's account of what had happened was never, ever in doubt again. She was believed, officially. That mattered to her more than the sentencing did. The divorce was finalized the following spring. Hazel kept the condo, she kept her car, she kept her own RRSP and her tax refund and her grandmother's ring that Trevor had at some point hidden in a drawer because he said it took up too much space in her jewelry box. She found it during the separation and brought it home. She brought it to my house one evening, held it out across the kitchen table and said, "I want you to keep this for now." I asked her why. She said, "Because this house is where safe things live." I cried after she left, sat at the kitchen table and put my face in my hands and cried the way you cry when it's been a long time building. I'm not embarrassed by that. I think it's important to say it plainly. I want to say something to any fathers or mothers reading this, because I know I'm not alone in what I felt during those 2 years before the restaurant, that low-level unease, the feeling that something is wrong but you can't quite name it, and you don't want to damage your relationship with your child by pushing. The voice that says, "It's not your place, and she's an adult, and maybe you're projecting." I listened to that voice too long. I'm not saying I could have stopped everything sooner. I genuinely don't know that. Hazel herself says the timeline was hers to move through. But I know that I told myself things were fine because it was easier than sitting with the fear that they weren't. What I did right, the one thing I'm glad I did, was that when the moment came, I didn't let it pass. I didn't look at my plate and pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. I stayed quiet. I stayed controlled. I thought about what would actually help my daughter rather than what would make me feel better in that moment. A scene in that restaurant might have felt good for 30 seconds. It would not have helped Hazel. The morning after the restaurant, I had gone back alone, asked to speak with the manager, and requested any available security footage from the dining room for that time slot. They were cooperative. That footage, combined with my phone video and Hazel's statement, made a straightforward case complicated for Trevor to refute. I think about that a lot, how close it came to going differently. If I had reacted the way my gut told me to in the first second, if I had stood up and grabbed him, I'd have been the one removed from the restaurant. I'd have potentially handed him grounds to countersue, to muddy the waters, to flip the story. The most useful thing I ever did for my daughter that night was wait 10 seconds before I moved. Hazel is doing well. She went back to work full-time in January, and her colleagues there, a solid group of people, I've met them at her clinic's open house, were quietly supportive in the way Canadians are, which means they didn't make a big production of it, but they checked in regularly and covered shifts when she needed them to. She started running again. She'd stopped running for about a year, and I hadn't understood until later that this was one of the things that had quietly been taken from her. She runs along the Oakville waterfront now, 3 mornings a week, and she sends me pictures sometimes. Early light on the lake, frost on the grass in the shoulder seasons. She hasn't dated anyone seriously since. That's fine. It's been a little over a year. It'll be her call, on her timeline. The last thing I want for her is to be pushed toward anything by anyone else's idea of what her life should look like. We have dinner together most Sundays. I cook, usually, nothing fancy. Roast chicken pasta, the kind of food you can eat in jeans at a kitchen table. She brings wine and talks too much and laughs at her own jokes before she's finished telling them. She got that from her mother too. I don't want this to be a story about what I did. I want it to be a story about what Hazel did. Because the truth is, she made every hard decision herself. She left, she testified. She sat through every appointment with Rosalind, every police interview, every awkward family moment where she had to tell someone what had really been happening. I handed her a glass of water sometimes. I drove her places, I was there. But the hard part was hers. If I'm being honest about what I learned from all of this, it's simply this. Being present is not the same as being helpful. You can be in the room and still be missing. When Hazel needed me to actually see what was in front of me, and then do something useful with what I saw, that was the only thing that mattered. Not the years of dinners and polite restraint. Not the times I convinced myself I was being respectful of her choices. The moment where I put the phone on the table and pressed record, that's the moment I was actually her father. The coffee maker is on my counter, not the windowsill. People always ask about that, I don't know why. Just wanted to mention it. Hazel's laugh still fills a room, still makes strangers smile. I hear it every Sunday across a kitchen table in Burlington, and every time I think, there it is, there she is, that's everything.